A nightlight indirect isn't a big deal. So it's not uncommon for kids to want some sort of light on, whether it's an indirect light, the hallway light coming under a door. If you have a nightlight in the room, I would encourage you to make sure it's as dim as possible and indirect. So mine, for example, my 4-year-old has a nightlight, and we have it behind kind of like a little bookshelf that's on the floor. So the nightlight's behind it, so it's not coming and shining directly onto his bed. It's kind of an indirect light that goes up, so it's not quite as bright. If you can find nightlights that have red light bulbs, that's ideal. That the red light has the least amount of LED, like blue light in it. So you can try to find those or have a cover just to dim the light a little bit. But a nightlight for bed isn't a deal breaker. If somebody needs a nightlight, that's all good. You can also look at indirect light somehow, whether it comes through the door, etc. For our morning larks, can we adjust their body clock through light exposure? So reduce in the AM, increase in the PM. And what defines being a night owl in children? So do night owls fall under disruptive bedtime or delayed onset? And what strategies do you recommend? If your natural circadian rhythm, which is what a night owl would be or a morning lark would be, it would be a natural circadian rhythm. That's kind of where your body clock would naturally fall. It wouldn't necessarily fall under a sleep problem at all. If it was something that was disruptive somehow, so because I'm a night owl, that means I wake later in the day and maybe I have to go to school late. Or I'm a night owl, so I have to wake up in the morning, which is disrupting my sleep. Then it starts to become something to tackle. There was another question in here too related to natural light, and do we naturally want to go to bed 15 minutes later? All of these tie into what actually controls our circadian rhythm, which is sunlight. So our natural circadian rhythms do tip past a 24-hour period of time. What keeps it in check is sunlight, and the fact that sunlight is on a 24-hour clock. So that's what keeps it in check. So if you are looking at a circadian rhythm disorder, or if you are looking at needing to shift a natural bedtime, yes, the easiest way to do that would be to manipulate light. You would want to be really strong with light in the morning. So first thing waking up would be heading towards a window, putting on lamps, doing whatever you can, screen time if needed, anything that just really cues the body, you need to be awake right now. And then making sure that you're dimming those lights an hour before bed if you can, if you need it to be really salient. So it could be turning on the candles. It could be dimming most of the lights or going into a room where things are quite dim. Summer is always tricky, so it could be trying to add in some sun blocking curtains in a living room if needed. Anything that kind of dims the lights as much as possible starts to build that melatonin production. And that melatonin is really that starter pistol of sleep. It is the thing that tells your body you need to start all the things related to sleep. So light is really the easiest way to do that. But it really isn't a sleep problem unless it starts to interfere with daily life, or the person feels like this is something we need to tackle because I'm missing out on things in my day. The other question here, kind of related, is when it comes to bedtime, are you aiming for a range? So 7:30 to 7:45 each night, or more specific, 7:30 at night? That depends. Bedtime, a kind of optimal bedtime, is usually calculated by counting backwards from when somebody typically wakes or when they're supposed to wake. So if I need to be up at 7 to start my day, and I know I need 12 hours of sleep, I need to be asleep by 7 p.m. And so my bedtime should probably be around 6:30, 6:45. You can do a 15-minute range. That's not the end of the world. It's when it tips past that and you start to shift your bedtime here and there. What that can start to do is change the sleep pressure for the day. So if I am, especially if your wake up time isn't consistent. So if your bedtime is shifting back and forth, sometimes it's 7, sometimes it's 8, sometimes it's 6:45, that may mean you want to sleep a little later. And if you can sleep later, that means that next bedtime, you're going to have less sleep pressure, if that makes sense. So it's going to be harder to go to sleep. So as much as possible, you want to stick to the wake up, and that bedtime can fluctuate a little bit, but the recommendation typically is within a 15-minute window is okay, and then maintain your wake up, and you're less likely to see a sleep problem develop. Where now you have this inconsistent up and down, and you're seeing problems at bedtime because somebody isn't tired. One of the questions was, I use my bedroom for Zoom meetings. Should I find somewhere else in the house to do that? Yeah, ideally, but it depends on where in your room. Living spaces are living spaces. If it's the only place that you're able to do it, just try not to do it in bed. So try to, set aside a little area on the side that's more your workspace rather than pairing it with the bed. But if it's in the bedroom off to the side, it shouldn't be an issue. Just give yourself some downtime before bed where you aren't doing any meetings or any computer time, just to make sure you have time to kind of reset and come back in ready for bed as opposed to heading towards the workspace. Another question is around helping children that may have severe neurological issues, somebody who is neurodiverse with perhaps a rare genetic disorder, and specialists are focusing very much on medication as opposed to focusing on sleep hygiene. And that's definitely not uncommon within a medical model. The focus is going to be on fixing, and often we fix with medication when it comes to medical issues. Sleep itself, in my opinion, is not always a medical issue. I have definitely worked with a couple of situations where I've worked alongside a psychiatrist or a specialist because there have been some underlying medical issues. I think it's really important on top of medication, and we're going to get into medication a little bit after this section, but it's really important to be working together with whoever it is prescribing the medication or suggesting the medication, but also knowing that medication itself will mask the problem and or can exacerbate the problem. So having that sleep hygiene in place, perhaps addressing it from a little bit more of a behavioral lens can be helpful as well. Not necessarily replace medication, but to assist along with it. And we're going to touch on medication in one of the case studies as well. Another question here is around a 3-year-old having milk before bed. Offered a snack if they need it, but doesn't always want it because they haven't eaten dinner. She doesn't wake stating she's hungry, but she's waking often. So could it be that she's hungry? It's possible. Snacks before bed aren't always a sleep dependency. They aren't always a bad thing. Sometimes, again, being aware of what it is we're eating. So something that's a little bit more sleep friendly, things like nuts or bananas, things that are a little bit more protein heavy. Those tend to be your best bets. They just last a little bit longer. But overall, having a quick snack before bed, trying to just make it a little bit earlier if possible. So giving at least a half hour between that snack and bedtime is ideal. Every system in our body has its own kind of body clock. And when we go to sleep, our digestive system does too. So whatever we've eaten prior to bed sits there. And so sometimes that's also why we're waking. It may not be that we're hungry. It just may be that the food that's sitting there is disagreeing with what's happening. So that's something to think about too, about why they might be waking. Milk generally before bed, because it is protein-based, it may not be an issue. Easiest way to check that would be to not give the snack or not give the milk before, or to just do it a bit earlier in the routine if it's an important part of the routine for the child, trying to do a bit earlier and spacing it out and see if that has any impact. The last question here is around a 4-year-old, and they do a 30-minute routine consistently. Bath, toilet, books, quiet play. That's a good routine. And seems to be drowsy. But once he lies down, he's alert again and wants to run around and play and restart the bedtime routine. And is the forbidden zone a thing? It is. The forbidden zone is a thing. It's called different things, no-fly zone, etc. But the forbidden zone is a thing. It is kind of a rise in alertness that can occur just past when you would typically go to sleep. And that's where you kind of hear kids getting their second wind and getting very excited. So it definitely is a thing. Going to bed maybe 15, 20 minutes earlier could solve that. That way you're not so close to the forbidden zone if that's what's happening. So just bringing bedtime a little bit earlier. Also figuring out the why. So why are we up and running around? What's happening when we do that? What's our reaction to that? Does it delay bedtime? And taking a look at how can we come back to those calming activities without redoing the whole bedtime routine. So can we come back to those activities, or do we need to rearrange? So do we need to maybe eliminate the quiet play or put it before books, so that you're ending on something that's in bed, quietly getting everything settled for sleep, and then fading yourself out. A lot more information there that we would definitely need to tackle that, but the forbidden zone is a real thing. So if you think that's what's happening, you can always shoot bedtime down a little bit and see if you can bypass it.
Do you have any tips on how to end or support a child during night terrors? This topic is something that I guess we haven't seen a ton of, but it is common in children. And so I'll explain the difference between what a nightmare is, as well as what's a night terror and how they're different, and supports you can put in place to reduce the likelihood of night terrors. A night terror is different from a typical nightmare. When trying to console someone experiencing a night terror, they're typically unresponsive, their body is out of control, they don't really know what's going on. These episodes can last between 10 minutes to 40 minutes where the child's non-responsive, and then after it's completed, will fall right back to sleep like nothing happened, and they won't remember it in the morning. Night terrors typically occur during non-REM sleep. So not during REM when our body is paralyzed, but during non-REM when we're getting into that deep sleep cycle. Usually happen between the first 3 to 4 hours of going to sleep. And nightmares, on the other hand, they're typically unpleasant or frightening dreams. I've had them, sometimes reoccurring ones. I always wonder why they're reoccurring. But they're different because they occur during REM sleep, which is our dream state. And during that time, our body is actually paralyzed. We don't usually move unless we're night walkers, and then that's a whole other sleep parasomnia disorder. But it doesn't typically involve that same level of intensity physically. When it comes to night terrors, it's important to rule out any medical conditions that could be underlying or interfering with sleep and breathing. Some factors that can trigger night terrors are a fever, sleep deprivation, so if not getting enough sleep, that can lead to more night terrors. Separation anxiety, emotional distress and stress, disrupted sleep schedules, medication, side effects, migraines. And there's more things, and I think definitely looking towards your doctor for more explanations of night wakings. If they are happening at a really high frequency, yes, go see your doctor. If it's more than 2 times per week, or if it's just happening in general, sometimes a perspective from a doctor and just put it on their radar is really helpful. Now, to answer the question specifically, when supporting someone through a night terror, it's important to stay by their side, provide comfort, but also give them space if they need it, and make sure to keep them safe. If their body is out of control, they don't know what they're doing. So it is also recommended not to try to wake someone up, although I can only imagine it can be the hardest thing to watch. Attempts of waking could potentially make the episode last longer. Some children will naturally grow out of this. It is important to continue to monitor the progress and be sure proper sleep hygiene, healthy sleep habits are in place as preventative strategies.